Hello, Sue.
Hello, John. I'm having a hard time adjusting my camera. You
You had
may,
that problem last week.
I don't,
We're looking at the ceiling now, so you're getting close.
no, you can, well, I think I'm gonna have to have I don't have a screwdriver, and I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna,
I bet you somebody where you stay will help you
oh
get
yeah,
that
will
lined
get
up.
me straightened. Well, you can see part of me
Yeah, you're dressed for warm weather.
for cold weather. Yeah,
I
well,
know,
it's
that
about
was a
50
joke.
here. It's about 50 here.
Yeah.
Is
Oh
it
boy.
warmer where you are?
Oh yeah, it's pleasant. It's probably 80.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
in short
no,
sleeves.
definitely not 80.
No.
And it's been very windy, so it feels colder than the temperature indicates.
Well, you've got a number of storms off the Atlantic, or
Well, we did over the weekend. Hold on a second. Now you can, no, now you still
uh,
can't.
yeah, you're just going to have to get that adjusted. Hi, Fred.
Oh,
Hey,
Fred,
John. Hey, Sue.
I cannot get my camera adjusted so you can see my face. So you can
Uh,
hear me and you can see my mouth, but no
uh,
face.
well,
So,
Oh, we can deal with that, Sue.
yeah,
okay, you're good sports. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you. You got a big honor this past weekend, Fred, didn't you?
I did what?
Got a big honor.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Good for you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Good for
I
you.
didn't get a raise with it though.
No raise? Oh,
No
well.
raise. No.
You know what they always kid me, uh, Fred? That we're going to I'll be in next year's budget and I'm going to get a big raise.
But
Right.
next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll still be zero, but I'll get about 3 or 4 times more.
Right.
Well, that's a real honor, Fred. You do a great job. You're a
Yeah.
Yeah,
real credit to the synagogue.
Fred, well deserved.
Yes,
Yeah. Thank you.
absolutely. A lot of dedication and commitment.
Well, and sharing of yourself.
Yeah. Well, Sue, that's all we've got left.
I guess.
That's right.
Fred,
Yeah.
how are your courses going at Furman?
Really good. In fact, we just finished the fall semester.
Right.
We don't start that again till after New Year's, till
Okay.
January. Yeah.
That was
Fred,
such a good program.
Hmm.
are you still teaching it? Is it Oral Robert? Not Oral Roberts. What's the name of
Yeah.
the
Furman. Furman.
Furman? Yeah.
Yeah, there's what they call an Ollie program there. Yeah, I've been doing that for like 20 years. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
When he gave up doctoring, he took up teaching.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got to do something when you're retired. I don't play golf, so there had to be another option.
Well, I
Uh,
used to try to play golf.
Uh,
and I go out a lot. I don't know that I would call it playing golf anymore.
somebody wrote a book about golf a few years ago. The title was "A Good Walk Ruined."
Yeah, 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 for sure. Well, that's a lot of what golf is.
Hmm.
But hey, I was going to ask you both in New York City with this Mondami, with the mayor that's
Hmm.
running. And I don't know
Yeah,
what the Jewish population is in New York, but it's the largest outside of Israel.
yeah,
How that's got to be awful for folks there to figure out how to vote.
yeah. Although again, a lot of them feel, that they don't care what he thinks about, Israel and Gaza, because the mayor of New York doesn't make foreign policy, and
No,
he can think whatever he wants. He's not going to have any effect on what goes on over there. Um, I don't know. A lot of people, what he's proposing to do, I think, is crazy, though. Free buses, free daycare, free everything.
yeah,
And New York is already probably the highest tax city in the world. I mean,
yeah,
you have federal tax, you have state taxes, the city income tax. On top of that, there's a corporate tax, for corporations there. And I think if he pushes it any further, you're going to get more people leaving for Texas, or somewhere else. A
yeah.
lot of the
Florida,
corporations won't
where you
stay.
guys are, North Carolina,
Yeah,
South Carolina.
yeah. Also, a lot of the taxes actually have to be approved by the state
State,
legislature.
yeah.
So we can't do any of that anyway. So, yeah, a lot of the things he promised, he's really not going to be able to do. And
Hmm.
I think the reason he's doing so well, I've watched a couple of his speeches. He's really got a lot of charisma. He's really a
I was
charming
going to
guy.
say he's
Yes.
very
He's very
charismatic.
upbeat, very happy, really knows how to talk to people, goes out in the street. And I mean, I can see why people like him. I just think it's going to be his term will be a disaster.
Yeah.
But it looks like he's going to win, so we'll see
Yeah,
what happens.
yeah.
Yeah, sure
Well,
does.
I think the fact that Cuomo is running is a disgrace, but that's
Well,
just
yeah,
because I'm a woman, I guess.
yeah,
I think most of the
mhm,
world shares your opinion, Sue.
You think?
yeah,
Oh yeah, I mean Como's I mean he's just what he did over COVID and all of the other sexual abuse cases he's had to deal with and all that. I mean he's a sleazebag.
yeah. Well, that's the other thing that's helping. That's helping Mamdani. He's not running against another good candidate.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
Curtis Sliwa, he hadn't got a Chinaman's chance.
no, he should. I mean, if he had dropped out, then Cuomo might have had a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of his voters probably would have gone for Cuomo, and it might have been a tighter race. But it's also see. In fact,
Going to
I
be
know a
interesting.
lot of I know a lot of conservatives are hoping Mamdani wins. They figure, he'll screw up so badly, it'll give democratic socialism a bad name.
Well,
Well, I'm going to be interested in the two governors' races.
Yeah,
Is it Jersey and North Carolina?
yeah. I think the Democrats are probably going to win both of those.
You think so?
Yeah, Spanberger's ahead like 8 or 9 points in the polls in Virginia. It's
yeah.
closer in New Jersey, but she's been ahead through the whole campaign. So I think both of those the Democrats will win.
Well,
And then the big thing is out in California, whether they approve that
Oh,
redistricting
the
referendum.
redistricting.
I
Yeah,
think that'll fly through, Fred.
it will. Yeah, which is really a shame because California had one of the fairest ways to draw districts. The legislature wasn't allowed to do it. They had a nonpartisan panel of retired federal judges who were the ones who drew the precincts, and the legislature could vote it up or down, but it couldn't make any changes in it.
Yeah.
And the problem was, they were reacting to Texas. They said, if Texas is going to redistrict and get 5 more Republican seats, we're going to get 5 more Democratic seats. And it's really a shame because they destroyed what was one of the best systems in the country to do that.
Yeah. But it's interesting what's gonna go forward because the midterm elections are gonna be really interesting based on all
Yeah,
the outcome of
yeah.
this is.
Although in American politics, 1 year is an eternity.
That's
You can
right.
imagine, you can imagine
Oh,
everything that'll happen between now and then. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
try not to think about it. Okay.
Well,
Well,
it's one of the things like your part of the country. uh, I I think your part of the country is one of the hottest parts of the United States, not only in terms of population growth, but
mhm.
key businesses coming in there.
It really is.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's a far cry. Now that I know that you grew up there, it's a far cry from what it was in the 60s and
Oh,
70s.
yeah. And the odd thing is, we can probably thank China for that. Because, when I grew up here in the 40s and 50s, the total economy was apparel and textiles.
Yes.
And then, China destroyed that, by the 70s. China was flooding this country with cheap clothes and,
Hmm.
but we couldn't compete with it. So that industry died. But
Yeah.
now we've got BMW, General Electric, Lockheed, Michelin. So we traded in a lot of minimum wage, low skilled jobs for
Yeah.
what we have now. So, I probably wouldn't feel that way if I were a steel worker in Ohio. But
Yeah.
for South Carolina, China was a benefit to us.
Yeah. And you didn't know that in advance, but yeah.
Exactly. We all thought it was a disaster. The state's going to be wiped out. But we had a couple of good governors who really went out, and brought these foreign industries in and just totally changed the economy of South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, I can remember driving from Atlanta to Greenville and going up through South Carolina in that area, and it was so horribly poor.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you know,
Even when I moved there 30 years ago, because
Mhm.
I was there for 25 years before I moved up here to Massachusetts. It the town has, the town's got marvelous restaurants now, and
hmm.
Hmm.
great theater, and it really has blossomed in response to the Europeans who have come there to work.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of French people. We have a couple of French families living in our neighborhood. The Michelin brought over. They're going to be
Hmm.
here for a few years. And there's a German community in Greenville and Spartanburg, attached to BMW. Yeah, it does add a lot. Though it's
Well,
kind of interesting. The Germans are really integrate into society. They join the Elks Club and the Rotary Club, and get active in a lot of things. The
mhm.
French keep to themselves.
Oh really?
They think America is a hardship post. So if Michelin transferred you to America for a few years, you got to
Yeah.
keep from getting contaminated by American culture.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Well, down here where we live, we have a lot of people from LG, Korea. From Korea.
oh, yeah, the Korean company, yeah,
They don't mix at all.
really,
I
yeah.
mean, it's amazing. Whereas a lot of, whether they're Japanese or Chinese that come here for various businesses, they all
Hmm.
wind up mixing. But boy, not the Koreans, and I don't know why that is, but they just don't. And they consider this a hardship duty.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a different culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So
well, I guess it's just the three of us again
yeah,
tonight.
I thought
Yeah,
maybe you had some new recruits with you today
yeah,
after
I thought
all the
so too. But
honorariums that you
apparently,
received.
yeah, no, they haven't shown up. So we can do a little bit though.
Okay.
a- actually the parsha for this week has a lot of stuff in it. It's Genesis, and it starts with chapter 18 in Genesis.
Okay.
Um, the first part is the first 16 verses, 1 through 16. Someone wants to read that.
Okay. Let me get to it. I'll go ahead
The
and
Lord
make sure.
appeared to him by the, how is that pronounced? Terebinth
It's
of,
called terebinth. Yeah, all a terebinth is a grove of oak trees. It's just a
is a
fancy name
what?
for a bunch of oak. A terebinth is a grove of oak trees.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just a fancy name for some oak
By
trees.
Marmee. He was speaking
What chapter and verse are we in?
18.
Chapter 18, verse 1 through Yeah.
He was sitting at the
Okay.
entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw three men standing there. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if you please, do not go past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet, recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourself. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 salahs of choice flour knead and make cakes." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to the servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk. They're waiting an awful long time out there under those trees. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set them before the men, and he waited on them under the trees as they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will return next year, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, and Sarah laughed to herself, saying that now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? But then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, I shall bear a child old as I am? If anything is too wondrous for the Lord, I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son." Sarah lied, saying, "I did not laugh, for she was frightened." But he replied, "You did laugh." The men set foot out from there and looked back down toward Sodom, Abraham walking with them to see them off. Now the Lord
So
said,
no, no, stop there. This is the
Okay.
first 16 verses. Yeah, so basically, these three men, supposedly who are angels, who come to Abraham. One of the questions that really comes up, he tells them, go get some flour, bake a cake, kill a calf, make the meat, and that takes hours to do.
That's what
When
I
you think
said. They
about it,
must really be reclining.
yeah. It's a long break. The other thing is he's serving them veal together with milk and cheese. So the question comes up. This is not a kosher meal.
Mhm.
So there are two explanations they gave for that. One is the Torah hasn't been given yet. The Torah won't be given until later on with Moses. So there are no dietary laws yet. Because the other explanation is angels don't eat. So the guys were just pretending to eat. So it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay. And
You know,
then
it's
with Sarah, when you tell Sarah's going to have a son, and Sarah, in verse 12, Sarah laughed within herself. And of course, the significant word is laugh, because the Hebrew word for laugh is tzahak. And from there you get Yitzchak, Isaac, her son's name. Yitzchak actually means he will laugh. Um, but then she goes on and says, "When after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my son being old, my Lord being old also." So she's not thinking right now about having a son. She's thinking maybe we're going to have some sex again.
Mhm.
but Fred, what is so interesting to me in this whole thing, and I never thought of this before, but it's how to treat your fellow man. So
Mhm.
much of what branches out from here in the in how we're supposed to deal with one another. It's all laid down here because Abraham didn't know that these guys were angels right away.
Well, no, he just thought they were just, strangers
Travelers.
happened to be
Yeah, just
passing by.
travelers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that he was. In fact, there's a legend about him that his tent had four opening flaps, one in each direction, so that he could immediately see anybody who was approaching and run
Wow.
out to meet them right away.
Yeah.
He was famous for his hospitality. And then the next, there's a lot of stuff in this Sedra. The next is Abraham arguing with God about Sodom, and that's
Yeah.
that's verses 17 to 33. So
I'll go
John,
ahead.
if you want to read that.
Yeah. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham that I am about what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household uh, after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I shall go down and see whether they have done what they have done altogether, according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know." Abraham intercedes for Sodom. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are there? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered and said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Again, he spoke to him and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of the 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of the 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Yeah, so that starts an old Jewish tradition of arguing with God.
Yeah.
And the interesting, there's also a theory, for congregational prayers, there are certain prayers that can only be said with a congregation in the synagogue, and the minimum number for that is 10. It's called a minyan, and they're prayers that can't be said unless you have 10 people. And one of the theories is that it comes from here. The tradition started with
Oh,
that. The
Oh,
idea
really?
if there are 10 good people in the place and the place is worth saving. So the idea that 10 people make up a congregation may have come from from these verses here.
yeah. This
The
is one of
interesting
the
thing, yeah, go
this is
ahead.
one of the most famous parts of I'd say one of the most, it's one of the many famous parts of the Old Testament that we all learn very early
Hmm.
on.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the other interesting thing is if you look at the very last verse, it said the Lord went his way as soon as he had left off speaking to Abraham. It's almost as if God had come down,
Hmm.
in the form of one of those men. And if you look at the very next chapter, the way chapter 19 starts, the very first verse says, the two angels came to Sodom at evening. Now, there were three people, though, who came to Abraham. And now we have only two angels going on to Sodom. And who was the third? I mean, possibly this was God in human form. That's one of the theories.
Oh, okay.
Because, and God, God, the two angels leave to go to Sodom. God stays behind, tell Abraham what he's going to do with Sodom. And they have this, bargaining back and forth about saving the city. And then God leaves. So, one theory is, one of these three men was God in human form. The other two are the angels that went on to Sodom. So then the story picks up. The next part, is what happens when the angels, arrive at Sodom. And of course, that's chapter 19, the first 11 verses. So you want to read those?
Sure,
1 through 11.
the
Yeah.
two angels arrived in Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet, that you may be on your way early." But they said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. They had not yet laid down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, gathered about the house, and they shouted to Lot and said to him, "Where are these men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may be intimate with them." So Lot went out to the entrance, shut the door behind him, and said, "I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back. The fellow," they said, "came here as an alien, and already he acts like a ruler. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, were struck with blinding lightning, so they were helpless to find the entrance. Then the men said to Lot, Whom else have you here? Son-in-laws, your sons and daughters, or anyone else you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place because of the outcry against them, before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went
Stop
out.
at that point. Let's
Okay.
start just at that point. Yeah, so basically, the it makes an interesting point. We talk about sodomy today. Homosexual relations, and
Mhm.
that's believed to come from this part of the Bible. You know, but there's another theory that the reason Sodom was destroyed was not because of the sin of sodomy, because of gay sex, but because of the way they treated strangers. I mean, regardless, whether they were men or women. The other odd detail in here is an inconsistency. Lot says, "Well, take my two daughters. They're virgins. They've never known a man. Take them instead of these two guests." But then a little bit later, they say he has sons-in-law. His daughters are married. They're not virgins. It's one of these little inconsistencies in the text. And again, you really wonder if this wasn't put together from several different accounts, and nobody bothered to try to get it to line up. But there's an obvious contradiction here. His two supposedly virgin daughters are married. He has two sons-in-law.
But the other thing is, he they wanted uh, they wanted him to let the two men out. What were they proposing? I mean, you have to read between the lines, but what were they going to do to
Yeah.
him?
Well, they said that we may know them, and and know in the Bible means having
In
sex.
well, and
Yeah,
in
Oh,
my
real?
translation
Oh,
it
yeah,
said
yeah.
it says that we may be intimate with them.
Right,
oh, okay.
which is what "no" means really, usually in the Bible.
Right.
It's used
Oh,
as a term for sex, and so this is where sodomy got attached to homosexual sex. From this section in here.
Oh, that
Um,
makes it, yeah, that, because I was thinking Noam means,
yeah,
you're going to talk, find out what are they interested in and what are they doing. No, that was,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. You wonder how his daughters felt about him at this point.
Yeah,
Just offering
yeah,
them up. These my guests are more important to me. Go take my daughters.
yeah,
Okay, but then they go on with to to describe this Lot fleeing the city, and that goes up to through verse 22 of 19. If you want to pick it up there.
sure. So Lot went out and said to his in law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of
Mhm.
this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons in law to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. as as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh, oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my life will be saved? He said to him, behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zor.
Which means a small thing.
Okay.
Basically. Um, yeah, Lot really is a strange character. I mean, this first of all, he is hospitable. You got to give him credit. He gets the strangers to come and stay in his house, so you have to give him credit on that side. On the other side, he's offering his two daughters up. And then, when the angels tell him to go, he just lingers. He just hangs around. They have to actually take his hand and drag him out, take him out there. And then, what he's saying, no, nobody's ever really been able to explain that verse very well. When he says, I can't escape to the mountain lest the evil overtake me. And nobody really understands what's meant by that. There's no really good commentary on it. He's saying, let me go to this other little city, away from Sodom, and I'll be okay there. But it's not really clear what this whole business about not being able to go to the mountains is all about. Nobody's been able to
It
explain that one.
almost sounded, in reading it, it almost sounded like because of the trip in the mountains is so stressful, it will kill him.
Could be that also, yeah. Although you really wonder if the only reason he's being saved is because he's Abraham's nephew.
Yeah,
Maybe they wouldn't bother with him otherwise. They're kind of doing it as a favor to Abraham.
sure.
And then the next verse is actually describe the destruction of Sodom and what happens afterward. And I think there's only three of us. Let me do some of the reads. It's
Okay.
not fair to make you guys read the whole thing. So you pick up with verse 23. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came to Zoar. And then the Lord caused to rain down upon Sodom and Gomorrah fire and brimstone from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and all that grew on the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked out toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, the smoke of the land went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt, which again usually is interpreted as Lot really wasn't worth saving, except that he was Abraham's nephew. So this was done for Abraham's sake. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain. So after all this arguing, he leaves Zoar and goes to the mountains anyway. Nobody's been able to come with a logical explanation for this. And his two daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth left to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night. The firstborn went in, lay with her father, and he knew not when she lay down or when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow, the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine this night also. Go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he knew not when she lay down nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bore a son, and called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger she also bore a son, and called his name Ben Ami, um, the same as the father of the children of Ammon unto this day.
Hmm.
So what you get basically is the two daughters apparently feel that the whole world's been destroyed. They don't know that it's only Sodom and Gomorrah, and they figure we're the last people left on Earth, and so if we don't have children, it's the end of the human race. So so they have sex with their father, and these are the two nations that in Deuteronomy are believed to be cursed. There's a verse in Deuteronomy, and no Moabite or Ammonite shall enter the covenant of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. They're believed to be a cursed nation, and this is usually given as the reason, that the product of incest. And the rabbis actually had a big argument about Lot's daughters. One said they were really good. They were really good people. They were good women, but they really sincerely believed that they were the last women on earth, and the human race would die out if they didn't have children. So even though it was really repulsive for them to do it, they went ahead and had sex with their father in order to keep the human race going. The other opinion on the other side is that they had grown up in Sodom among all the sin going on in Sodom. So they were basically just sluts who didn't care who they slept with. So you can buy either explanation, for what happens. It's actually what makes the story of Ruth so interesting, because here you have a Moabite woman, who the Israelites
Oh,
should
yeah,
ordinarily have
yeah.
nothing to do with, but because of her personal qualities, the loving kindness she showed Naomi, her mother-in-law, the rule was set aside for her, and she was allowed, to join Israel.
The, when you look at all this as one big picture, and you
Mhm.
think about what took place there and how bad Sodom and Gomorrah was, and it probably wasn't different than some of these other uh, places.
Mhm.
I mean, that just at the time, those things with all the false gods and all of this kind of stuff, there probably wasn't a lot of restraints, social restraints.
Yeah, yeah, very
And
little probably.
and and you put it, we look at it through today's prism, but at what point in the in the Jewish community, that began to get recognized as being something that's a no-no? Was it,
Well,
very early on?
we don't. Well, apparently it would be after the receiving of the Torah, and
Okay,
at Mount. 'Cause again, really up to then there was really no law.
yeah,
Abraham, God has come to Abraham and said, I've chosen you, and I'm making a covenant with you. I'm going to make a great nation out of you, which is really great. But he never tells Abraham, what do you have to do? What's your part of the
yeah,
bargain?
yeah,
Uh, well, the only thing he does tell him is, you have to be circumcised. That's the first command he
yes.
gives him. That's the
And
first
no
thing.
other lords before nobody other gods before me.
Well, he doesn't even say that at that
No,
point.
that comes
Yeah,
later.
yeah, it's
Oh,
not till you,
okay.
it's not really till you get to Mount Sinai, that you get all the fine print in the contract. This is,
So he signs on without knowing all the fine
well,
print.
he really doesn't. I mean, God, if you look at the text, God says, I've chosen you. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to
Yeah,
multiply you
yeah,
greatly. You'll be the father of a great nation. And Abraham says, great. Okay, why not? And the only thing that God really asks of Abraham, so far at least, is to be circumcised. That's the only law that he gives him at that
mhm,
point. Although, again, I think we talked about this from the story of Noah. There is the rabbinic tradition, that that the covenant of Noah had laws in it. So according to the rabbi, the covenant that God makes with Noah after the flood actually has seven requirements in it. There's a prohibition against murder, against theft, against adultery or incest, against lying, and against blasphemy, which is really five of the Ten Commandments. And
yeah,
then there are two others. One is not to eat the limb of a living, which uh, which I always thought was crazy. But then I saw a National Geographic thing on television years ago, and it was about the Maasai, who are nomads in Africa, who move around with their flocks and herds, and they actually they drink blood. They'll
right,
take a hollow reed, bevel the end, cannulate a vein on the animal, draw up some blood, and mix it with milk from the animal. So there were people apparently in the biblical time that did eat blood. And also, I don't know how they get the animal to hold still. They will actually cut off a piece of meat from a living animal and eat it. So apparently people were eating the limb of a living back then. So that was number six. And number seven is a requirement that you have to establish courts of justice, for your society. And
mhm,
any nation that meets those seven rules will be considered a righteous nation. All these other laws in the Torah are just kind of extra credit stuff for the Jews. But there's a basic covenant that everybody has to abide by. Those 7 points of the covenant of Noah.
yeah.
And so there was some standard to judge Sodom by. Okay. Um, let's see. Then this is really a long parsha this time. So why don't we skip over to chapter 21, because that's really where the story picks up again in
Okay,
chapter 21. And this is where we introduce Isaac and Ishmael, actually. Um, uh, let's see, 21. Yeah, the first 21 verses of chapter 21. Sue, you want to read that?
Sure. The Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken. Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name of Isaac. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as the Lord had commanded. Abraham was now 100 years old when his son was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle child, yet I have borne a son in my old age? The child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter greatly distressed Abraham. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy of your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, you do. Do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is also your seed. Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder and together with the child sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Bathsheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went out and sat on a distant bowshot away, for she thought, let me not look on the child as he dies. And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for the God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he dwelt in the wilderness and became a bowman. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And there
So,
come the Muslims.
no, no, stop at that. But
Yeah,
that's the end of that particular story.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, the actually the your translation I think missed something because let's see, when Abraham gives this feast for weaning Isaac, if you look at chapter at verse 9, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham. And actually, the Hebrew word that follows that is tzachak, laughing again.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the basic theme word for this whole part of the Bible. When the angels first tell Abraham Sarah will have a son, and she overhears it, she laughs, in disbelief. And then when this story, when she has the son, she's laughing again, but this time, with joy. And she says, everybody will laugh with me. But then over here in verse 9, when Ishmael, is seen laughing, Sarah interprets that as mocking, laughter in a negative sense is why she gets so angry. But the odd thing here is, you picture her going into the desert, and you get the impression this is a baby she's carrying. Because she puts the child under a bush, and she doesn't want to see it, doesn't want to be there and see him die. But actually, you think about it, Ishmael is about 16 years old at this point. Remember, Hagar has him, and then it's basically when Abraham becomes circumcised, he circumcises Ishmael at the same time, and Ishmael is 13 years old at that time. And then a year later, Sarah has Isaac. And then at the Feast of the Weaning, which would be at least a year later, probably a couple of years later. So, Ishmael is 15 or 16 years old at this point. It's an obvious inconsistency. And, one theory is they wanted to portray him as a baby because it makes the story kind of, more poignant that way. But, if anybody would be having trouble, dying of thirst, it would be his mother, not him. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a teenage boy.
Well, was Sarah a slave then?
No.
Well,
No.
no, Hagar was remember, Hagar
Hagar was a
Sarah's
slave.
Egyptian slave,
Okay.
and she actually gives Hagar to Abraham, saying, why don't you go ahead and have sex with her, and maybe you can have a child with her.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And as you remember, it's a very common occurrence. You'll have people after years of trying to have a child not being able to, they'll go ahead and adopt, and then shortly after that they get pregnant.
Right.
you know, and it may be the same idea here. Maybe, if you have a child with her, maybe it'll help. But then, when Hagar becomes pregnant, then the whole order of things, she starts off as Sarah's slave girl, And now all of a sudden, she's the most important woman in the camp. She's carrying Abraham's child, and
Yeah,
she's lording it over Sarah. And Sarah kicks her out, and she leaves because Sarah's abusing her. And then the angel tells her, "Go back. Put up with it. It's okay." And now here she's driven out again. Um, but it's interesting. The story, I think they deliberately made Ishmael a baby again just to make him more appealing in the story, but he's clearly not. Um, and then, of course, the most famous part of this whole parsha is the one that starts with chapter 22. The what's called the binding of Isaac, which is probably one of the most famous parts in the Bible. John, if you want to
sure.
read 22 all the way through verse 19.
22 through what?
1 through 19 in chapter 22.
Okay. Start at chapter 22, 1. Okay.
Yeah, the first 19 verses of 22.
Okay. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, so that when so they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order to, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have sent not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by the thorns, by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, Be myself, I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate to his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba.
Yeah,
Now, okay,
stop at that point. That's the end of that story,
yeah,
actually. And that's probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible,
yeah, yeah.
sacrifice. Yeah, and it's interesting. If you look at verse 2, God said to him, "Take now your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac." And actually repeats it 4 times here. And there's a nice rabbinic commentary on that, where supposedly God said, "Take your son." Abraham says, "I have 2 sons." He says, "Your only son." Each one is the only son of his mother, the one you love. I love both of them. And then finally, Isaac, he takes it. And again, we're kind of shocked by this, but child sacrifice was very common, and in the biblical world. So the original audience for this, wouldn't have been surprised at all. This is something that all the religions around there were doing. Um, the question, one of the interesting commentaries is, if you just read it literally, Abraham was put to a very severe test and he passed it, you
Mhm.
know. But there's an interesting counter commentary. It was a Hasidic rabbi back in the 19th century called the Gerer Rebbe, and he said Abraham didn't pass the test. Why didn't he argue for his son? I mean, this is a guy who, spent an hour arguing with God to save a bunch of evil people in Sodom. And he had nothing to say. He wouldn't stand up and at least argue with God for his own son.
That's an amazing conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an interesting detail. The very last verse you read, verse 19, it says, "So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba." Well, Abraham doesn't mention Isaac. Did Isaac go back with Abraham? Did he not want to have anything to do with his father after that? We don't know. It's interesting. After this, God never speaks to Abraham again. That's the last time God speaks to Abraham is then. And actually, Abraham and Isaac never speak to each other again after this.
I
So,
can
and one
understand
theory
that.
that is that Isaac didn't want to go back with his father. What?
I can understand that he
Yeah.
didn't speak
Yeah,
to his father again.
Yeah. How would you
yeah,
like to be
that's
lying on the altar and having your dad stack wood on top of you?
exactly. And again, this is not a baby because
Yeah.
basically he's big enough that he's carrying the wood. So
Yeah.
this is an old enough child to carry a load of firewood, and
Yeah.
he knows what's going on. He asks his father. He says, "We have the wood, and we have the fire, and we have the knife.
Where's the
Where's the
goat?
lamb?" So
Yeah.
he's old enough to know what's going on and what's required for sacrifice. So this is not some little toddler that Abraham can just toss on the altar. He would have really, in a sense, had to cooperate with it. You think this kid is probably at least 8 or 9 or 10 years old at this point.
Sure.
So he would have had to submit to this. It would have been really hard for Abraham to do this otherwise. And if you look at the life of Isaac, one of the things Isaac really doesn't do very much. Things just get done to him. Starting with this, he doesn't find his own wife. Abraham sends his servant, to get a wife for him. He ends his life, with his 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, basically cheating him, to get the birthright, to Jacob. Things just get done to him. He doesn't do anything. And one theory is, this has got to be one of the worst cases of PTSD ever, in
Yeah.
history. Maybe it scarred him for life. This whole passive kind of personality he has for the rest of his life, could be the result of this. There are a
And
couple of other traditions that come out of this. The tradition is that the temple was built on this site where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, which is Mount Moriah, and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is on Mount Moriah, which probably comes from here, and also the ram. From that we get the tradition of the shofar, the ram's horn, that's blown on certain occasions in the synagogue. But I've always kind of liked that contrarian opinion that Abraham didn't pass the test, he flunked it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, it's interesting going through this with your support on it, because you read these things and you don't put all this context together,
Hmm.
and with your depth and knowledge, you have enough to be able to make this, you raise questions about how some of this all came together. And I'm always go back and
Hmm.
think about, well, at this time, all these were passed person to person, generation to generation.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And I
obviously
think,
somebody had to
yeah, I think,
sort all that out.
yeah. Well, I think the reason, that's why we have all these contradictions, inconsistencies that you
Yeah.
often see in the text. A lot of this was probably passed down, by oral transmission for generations before anybody wrote it down. So you end up with several different versions of the same
Hmm.
story. It's almost inevitable. And I think it's reflected in the text. You can
Hmm.
pick up a lot of inconsistencies, like Ishmael's a teenager, but they say he's a baby, when they leave, things like that, which probably come from the fact that the guys who eventually compiled all of this, perhaps they didn't feel they had the right to edit anything out. They just took everything they had, put it down, and left it to future generations to sort it out.
Yeah. Or
If
it
you
could have
gave
been
this
like two or three similar stories that you knew there was some
exactly,
connection, but they
yeah.
are all a little bit different.
Hmm. And a modern publisher, if you gave this as a manuscript to a modern publishing house, they have a team of editors take it apart and
Yeah.
and redo it, to make everything fit. But apparently, the guys who did the editing on the Bible, they may have felt that it wasn't their place to do that. It had been transmitted to them, and it wasn't to them to decide which version of the story is right. They just left it all in.
Yeah. Yeah. The-
So. So anyway, next week we pick up with let's see, chapter 23. We
Okay.
pick up with the death of Sarah, and we move on to the next generation of Abraham. Yeah, hopefully Rachel and Chris will be back with us by then.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
well,
I
thank you
think
very
Harold's
much.
still in
Yeah.
England. Yeah,
Yeah. This is great. And again,
yeah,
congratulations on your
yeah,
honorarium.
On your big
yeah.
honor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well
and my
deserved.
my raise. Yeah,
And your raise.
yeah.
Yeah.
They gave me a 20% raise over last year.
Just
Yeah.
like John is in
Okay.
next year's budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next year's
Okay.
budget. And next year never
Okay.
arrives.
Right. Okay.
It's
Okay. See
always
you.
going to be next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're
See you
pretty
guys
quick,
next week.
Sue. Yeah.
Good
Okay.
See
night,
y'all next
everybody.
week.
Okay. Good
Yeah.
night.